discussion. In this week's discussion, we're in session 7 of our ongoing series entitled Prove the Complexity Factors. And this is the last session in this discussion series. And today I have for you a fascinating discussion that, believe it or not, is going to contain a surprise ending, which I'm hopeful will be helpful to some of you out there in cyber viewing land catching this video over the next few days, weeks, and even months. So stay tuned for that. But before we get into today's discussion, let's just quickly review for those of you that are just joining us in this discussion series, and for those of you who have been with us ongoing, let's just review some of the topics that we've discussed so far in this video series. So this series is entitled Prove the Complexity Factors. And in session number 1, we talked about how now, more than ever, it's essential that you be able to prove your use of the complexity factors and to prove that your use of the complexity factors comports with the exact language of the law as the law is described in CCR 9795. See, I want to discourage you from this point forward for submitting random billing just to see sort of what the claims administrator will allow to stick and just to find out how much you can get reimbursed. Some doctors use this as their regular operating procedure. They just sort of throw out a bill without any substantiation for the dollar amount of the bill just to see what it will get down coded to, or just to see what'll stick, and just to see how much they can get reimbursed for their report. And it seems that this is a carryover from our clinical practice, where we sometimes just sort of inflate our day-to-day services just to see what will stick and what will get reimbursed. Well, in the workers' compensation system, that doesn't fly, and that has led to doctors being disciplined and either temporarily or permanently losing their qualified medical evaluator credential. So now, in the new era, we have to prove that we deserve to be paid for each of the complexity factors that we employ. So therefore, the sections of your report that deal with the complexity factors, such as the review of records section of your report, the causation section of your report, the apportionment section of your report, the medical research section of your report, these sections of your report are the sections of your report upon which your greatest intellectual effort should be focused. These sections of your report should be masterpiece sections of your report. They should be perfect. They should be brilliant. They should be beautiful. They should be elaborately formatted. They should be lengthy. They should be thorough. They should be comprehensive. These sections of your report that constitute the reimbursable sections of your report deserve your best effort, okay? And so that was our discussion in session number 1. From session 1 onward, we started to talk about the complexity factors, and we divided the complexity factors themselves into those complexity factors that can be established before the face-to-face evaluation, complexity factors that can be established at the face-to-face evaluation, and complexity factors that are established after the face-to-face evaluation when you're sitting down by yourself at your computer and working on the report. So we started to tackle and dissect each of these complexity factors in this order. So we then talked about the review of records and the causation complexity factors, which are complexity factors that can be largely established in the days and weeks even before you set eyes on the examinee in the face-to-face evaluation. Then we talked about the complexity factor that involves a prior written agreement, and we said that the prior written agreement complexity factor is the big daddy, is the kingfish of all the complexity factors, because it supersedes all of the other complexity factors. If you're able to obtain a prior written agreement from the parties that your evaluation involves extraordinary circumstances, then it becomes unnecessary to document review of records as a complexity factor. It becomes unnecessary to document causation as a complexity factor, apportionment as a complexity factor. It becomes unnecessary to document medical research as a complexity factor. So the prior written agreement is the king of all the complexity factors. Now, I admonished you in this discussion wherein we talked about the prior written agreement. I admonished you from trying to obtain a prior written agreement from the parties when the evaluation is not truly extraordinary. Now, your ability to obtain a prior written agreement from the parties hinges on your communication skills and on your ability to convince the parties that the evaluation is truly extraordinary. Well, your ability to convince the parties that the evaluation is extraordinary will be enhanced when the evaluation is truly extraordinary. In other words, you cannot fabricate extraordinary circumstances. You cannot hope to convince the parties that the evaluation involves truly extraordinary circumstances and that they should provide you a written agreement that allows you to bill at the highest level when the evaluation is truly not extraordinary. The parties are going to look at your written description of the extraordinary circumstances, and they're going to make an assessment as to whether they agree with you or not as to the extraordinary circumstances. So limit your request for a prior written agreement of extraordinary circumstances to those cases that are truly extraordinary, okay? If you have a truly extraordinary case, you should have no compunction, no hesitation, no reservation at all in requesting a prior written agreement. And in my experience and in the experience of my subscribers, you'll be able to get a prior written agreement roughly 60% of the time. 60% of the time is the statistic that we found that's the accurate measure of the success in being able to obtain a prior written agreement. After that, we talked about the face-to-face time, how to document face-to-face time. We talked about how to capture the complexity factors of causation and apportionment, and specifically we focused on interviewing techniques to uncover key facts and relevant data related to causation and apportionment complexity factors. We talked about how to unearth an examinee history of prior multiple injuries. Many times the claims administrators and the parties fail to advise us of the examinee's true history. And in many cases, examinees that we're seeing have a history, especially of prior industrial injuries. And this history of prior industrial injuries can be unearthed and discovered through an EAMS search, an EAMS database search. I don't know how many of you know this, but on the Division of Workers' Compensation's website, there is an EAMS public case lookup tool that involves public information. Anyone can look up these cases and do a case search on an examinee's name, date of birth, and zip code, and discover if an examinee has a prior history of industrial injuries. So it pays to do an EAMS search prior to the face-to-face evaluation, because the EAMS search may provide you with the only indication that you have that the examinee has a prior history of industrial injuries. So you can use this information in the face-to-face evaluation to capture the prior multiple injuries complexity factor. In session number 5, we talked about medical research and how to capture medical research as a complexity factor. And I must comment here in this video that as a result of the discussion on medical research, I myself have had an opening of the mind as to the uses for medical research in the future. Up until now, I myself have used medical research very sparingly, I would say. It's not often that I find a need to employ medical research. as a complexity factor. But my new research into the medical research complexity factor has opened my mind to new possibilities for the use of medical research. Now, the definition of medical research, which is described in CCR 9793, tells us that the purpose of medical research is to help resolve a dispute. So therefore, medical research is necessary to resolve a dispute. Medical research into topics that are not in dispute is unnecessary medical research and will not be reimbursed. Medical research that's necessary to resolve disputed issues is important, it's critical, and it's beneficial. And the reason that there are more and more opportunities that I'm now seeing for the use of medical research is because the key data and the relevant facts that you glean from your medical research helps you to substantiate your opinions and conclusions on the disputed issue as substantial medical evidence. So medical research is a fabulous tool to help you support your opinions and conclusions on disputed issues, and I'm suggesting that you keep an open mind as to how can you use medical research for that very purpose, to help substantiate and support your opinions and conclusions as substantial medical evidence. And then finally, in our last session, possibly perhaps the most valuable of all the sessions, we talked about the separate section in the beginning of your report wherein you elaborate to the parties on your use of the complexity factors and where you elaborate to the parties upon the necessity of employing the complexity factors in your particular evaluation. And in my opinion, most doctors do a very poor job of creating a separate section in the beginning of their report, and they do a very poor job in elaborating on what it is they expect to be paid for with their evaluation. And for this reason, because of the poor job that most doctors do in this separate section, most doctors have their fees slashed and cut and downcoded by the claims administrator because they don't properly document their use of the complexity factors in a way that convinces the parties that their complexity factors qualify for full reimbursement. And I have an example for you today of a couple of reports that went all the way through the independent bill review process. And even through independent bill review, the independent bill reviewer could not make heads nor tails of the doctor's billing, and the independent bill reviewer had to conclude that the downcoding that was done by the claims administrator was actually appropriate. So the separate section in the beginning of your report is where you elaborate and detail exactly what it is that you expect and demand to be paid for your evaluation, and it has to be good. And every one of your complexity factors has to be solid. Everyone has to be documented, and every single one of the complexity factors has to be proven to the parties. And that is the entire philosophy of this discussion series, is that we have to prove that our use of the complexity factors qualifies for reimbursement. Okay? Now, in today's session, I have a little bit different flavor for you. What I want to do in today's session is I want to go over some QME billings that have been questioned and challenged by the claims administrator. And the QME's billing level of service has been downcoded by the claims administrator. Well, in a small percentage of these cases, the doctors submit their report and their billing to independent bill review for a third-party opinion as to whether or not the report should be reimbursed as it was billed, or whether the claims administrator's downcoding of the report to a lower dollar value reimbursement was indeed appropriate. So I have 3 cases that I want to share with you today, and I'm going to follow up those 3 cases with a surprise ending that may be helpful to many of you out there who yourselves have had your reimbursement or your billings down coded and your QME reports billed at a much lower rate than what you originally expected or anticipated. So I'm expecting that that'll be helpful to you. So for today's discussion, I've provided you 3 references. Those include 3 cases that were submitted to independent bill review. And I'll give you a minute now to go ahead and retrieve those references so that as we go over those cases, you can follow along with your own eyes and understand why these reports were down-coded, why these reports were not reimbursed in full, and therefore why it's necessary for you to follow and comply with all of the steps and procedures that we've elaborated on in this discussion series. So I'll go ahead and retrieve those references myself, and I look forward to being back with you here in just a few moments as we continue with our ongoing series entitled Prove the Complexity Factors. So I'll be back with you here very shortly. Okay, I'm back with you now and have my references here. I hope you have your references with you as well so that you can lay your own eyes on these decisions that came down through independent bill review. So reference number 1 is dated March 29, 2018, and this involves a qualified medical evaluation report that the doctor submitted to the claims administrator as an ML-104. The ML-104 was billed for $7,437. $7,437. And the claims administrator paid $937.50 as an ML-103. So this report was down-coded from an ML-104 to an ML-103, and the disputed amount was $6,500. Now, I can bet you'll agree with me that the doctor in this case really wanted to get that $6,500 reimbursed, so he submitted the matter to independent bill review. So let's review how independent bill review looked at this billing. Now, it's important that you know that the date of service on this billing was August 30, 2017. August 30, 2017. So August 30, 2017 was prior to the publication of the Division of Workers' Compensation's education module, wherein the DWC formally published training for us qualified medical evaluators to train us formally for the first time on their new interpretation of the complexity factors. Prior to the publication of the 11/15/2017 education module, the Division of Workers' Compensation was promoting its new interpretation of the complexity factors only through seminar presentations, wherein one of the members of the Division of Workers' Compensation came to speak and spent an hour or so sharing the new interpretation of the complexity factors. Other than that, there was no dissemination, no formal dissemination from the Division of Workers' Compensation as to their new interpretation of the complexity factors. Well, on 11/15/2017, the Division of Workers' Compensation finally published their education module. So that date, 11/15/17, marked a formal date moving forward, whereas all reimbursements from claims administrators for QME reports were to follow the DWC's education module. For dates prior to the publication of the education module, we didn't know how to bill. We didn't know what was required of us. We didn't know what was the formal final word on the complexity factors in the DWC's interpretation. So most doctors just continued to bill the way that they always had, the way that they'd always known to bill. They did the best they could in constructing their separate section at the beginning of the report, and we muddled along. This is an example of such a scenario. So this doctor billed an ML-104 for $7,400, and even though the Division of Workers' Compensation's education module had not yet been published as of the date of service of this evaluation, which was 8/30/17, the claims administrator followed the Division of Workers' Compensation's new interpretation and downcoded the doctor's report to an ML-103. And let's see how independent bill review handled the downcoding. Well, independent bill review took a hard look at each of the complexity factors that the doctor billed for, and independent bill review found some problems, both with the doctor's billing and also with the doctor's compliance with the so-called new interpretation of the complexity factors. So when the doctor submitted his application for independent bill review to support his charges, he indicated in his application for independent bill review that his report indeed addressed causation. So the doctor wants to be reimbursed for causation as one of his complexity factors that comprise the ML-104 billing level. Well, in describing his total times involved with the evaluation, the doctor reported 1.5 hours of face-to-face time, 3.5 hours of review of records, 1.25 hours of medical research, and 23.5 hours preparing the report. Now, do you find any kind of inconsistency with those relative time contributions to the evaluation? 1.5 hours face-to-face, 3.5 hours reviewing the records, and 23.5 hours, almost one entire day, 24 hours is an entire day, 23.5 hours preparing the report. I wish we had the report. I wish we could take a look at this fabulous, fabulous, unbelievable report that took 23.5 hours to prepare. Well, the doctor billed a total of 29.75 hours for $7,400 and some change, using causation as a complexity factor. Well, independent bill review found that he met the criteria for review of records because he had more than 2 hours of review of records. They found that he did not meet the criteria for face-to-face time because he documented only 1.5 hours of face-to-face time versus 2 hours of face-to-face time. They find that he did not meet the criteria for medical research as a complexity factor because the doctor documented only 1.25 hours of medical research. But they found that he did meet the complexity factor of 6 or more hours on any combination of 3 complexity factors because the face-to-face time, the review of records time, and the medical research time came to 6.25 hours. So the doctor correctly documented 3 complexity factors, or 6 or more hours on any combination of 3 complexity factors. Well, that only leaves the causation complexity factor left for the doctor to comply with in order to qualify for an ML-104. Well, as we know, the causation complexity factor, as it's written into law, reads as follows. It says, addressing the issue of medical causation upon written request of the party or parties requesting the report, or if a bona fide issue of medical causation is discovered in the evaluation. And by the way, that latter sentence has been dropped off. I don't know why it's here under independent bill review's definition of causation, because that section, the bona fide issue of medical causation, is no longer written into the language of the law. Okay? Well, they found that the doctor did not meet the causation complexity factor criteria because there was no written request from the parties. There was no written request from the parties requesting the doctor to address medical causation. The reason there was no written request from the parties requesting the doctor to address causation was because this was already an accepted claim and causation was not an issue in dispute. Now, this has been an area that's been hotly contested, and that is, does causation as a complexity factor apply when we receive a written request from the parties to address causation? At the time, under the Division of Workers' Compensation's interpretation of the complexity factors, we could only use causation as a complexity factor in the cases of denied claims, cases where causation was in dispute. It was the position of the Division of Workers' Compensation that in the presence of an accepted claim, causation is not an issue in dispute. Well, in this case, it was an accepted claim, so causation was not in dispute. And even on top of that, further disqualifying causation as a complexity factor at the time, the doctor didn't even receive a written request to address causation. He simply stated that he addressed causation within the body of his report and wanted to be paid for an ML 104 for invoking causation as a complexity factor. And this did not fly with independent bill review. And independent bill review agreed with the claims administrator that the doctor had only met 3 of the complexity factors and that the ML 103 was the more appropriate and accurate billing level for that report. So the doctor had to write off $6,500 and 23.5 hours of his precious time in preparing that report because he did not know what he was getting into prior to the evaluation. Now, I'm here to tell you that this type of an outcome where you have to write off 23 hours of time, $6,500 of services, should never, never, never happen. You should never let yourself get into a position where you devote 23.5 hours of work for something that you're not going to get reimbursed for. This doctor should have known that he didn't have what it took to invoke causation as a complexity factor, and the doctor probably knew it. He probably knew it. He probably was just throwing a big bill out there to find out what would stick and find out what he could get paid from the claims administrator. One of the reasons I say that is because of the large discrepancy between the face-to-face time, which was 1.5 hours, and the report preparation time, 23.5 hours. To me, that seems a little bit suspicious, a little bit out of proportion. Okay? Now, the next one is a similar situation. The doctor billed an ML 104, and the total amount billed in this case was $3,125. The claims administrator objected to that and downcoded the report to an ML 103 at $937.50. So there was a disputed amount of $2,187.50, which represents roughly, let's call it 9 hours of doctor time. 10 hours would be $2,500. This is $2,187.50. So between 8 and 9 hours of doctor time is in dispute. Well, independent bill review took a look at it, and they found that the doctor did not include a separate section at the beginning of his report wherein he elaborated on his use of the complexity factors. The only way they were able to determine his times involved were through entries that he made on his invoice wherein he documented the times that he expected to be reimbursed for. Now, CCR 9795 tells us in law, it's a law, that our report has to have a separate section at the beginning of the report. It's 2 criteria. You must have a separate section. It must be at the beginning of the report wherein you elaborate on your use of the complexity factors. This doctor did not do that. On his invoice, however, he documented 3 hours face-to-face, 1.25 hours reviewing records, 8.25 hours preparing the report. So let me say those again. 3 hours face-to-face, 1.25 reviewing records, that's 4.25, and 8 hours preparing the report. Well, they found that he met the complexity factor for face-to-face time because he had 3 hours face-to-face. They find that he did not meet the criteria for review of records because he only had 1.25 hours of review of records. They found that he met the criteria for 4 or more hours on any combination of 2 complexity factors because he had 3 hours face-to-face and 1.25 hours of review of records for a total of 4.25. He just barely made it, 4.25. So he's got 2 complexity factors. He needs 2 more to get to an ML 104 or 1 more to get to an ML 103. Well, he tried to invoke causation and apportionment as complexity factors in order to elevate to the ML 104 level. The medical review, independent medical review, denied his use of causation because 2 things. Number 1, causation was not a disputed issue. And then number 2, he had no written request from the parties to address causation. In the cover letter that he received, there were many questions asked of him, none of which asked him to address the issue of medical causation. Similarly, he tried to invoke apportionment as a complexity factor. And here's his description of apportionment on page 52 of his report. There's a section that says apportionment. And he wrote, final opinions, in other words, his final opinions regarding qualified injured worker status and apportionment are deferred until he reaches permanent and stationary status. And the doctor felt that discussion of apportionment, that the apportionment will be deferred until he reached permanent and stationary, he felt that qualified for his use of apportionment as a complexity factor to elevate his report to the level of an ML 104, wherein he could bill $250 per hour for every hour involved in the evaluation. And I'm here to tell you that description of apportionment as a complexity factor is not consistent with the language of the apportionment complexity factor. This doctor was simply throwing complexity factors up against the wall to find out which the claims administrator would allow to stick. And that is not how you construct an ML 104. You construct an ML 104 by adhering to the exact language of the complexity factors as they're written. When you do that, you very quickly realize when your evaluation will involve apportionment and when it will not. And when it will not involve apportionment, You don't spend hours and hours and hours on the report that you're later just going to have to write off. You simply assess the evaluation for what it is, provide the report that complies with the complexity factors, and get it off your desk so that you're not left spending unnecessary time for which you're not going to be reimbursed. So they ruled against apportionment as a complexity factor, and the only saving grace that allowed this report to be elevated at least to the ML103 level was the fact that it was a psychologic evaluation, which comprises one complexity factor. So he had two complexity factors with his face-to-face and review of records, and then he was able to invoke the psychologic evaluation, which elevated it to the ML103 level, and independent bill review approved the payment for an ML103 at $937.50. So the doctor, by not knowing what he was doing, by not knowing what he was getting into in meeting the examinee face-to-face, spent somewhere between 8 and 9 hours unnecessarily for no reimbursement. 8 or 9 hours. That could comprise an entire weekend. If the doctor devoted 4 hours on a Saturday, 4 hours on a Sunday, the doctor gave up an entire weekend for which he got no reimbursement. And guess what? It's the doctor's own fault because he didn't know what he was getting into prior to the face-to-face evaluation. Okay? Now, let's go over our third case, and this one has a surprise ending, which I'm hopeful will be helpful to you as well. And this involves one of my own cases, so I know this case quite intimately, and I'll share a couple of the details with you. So I received a cover letter, and the cover letter told me that the evaluation involved a denied claim. It says in paragraph number 2, and I don't want to show the claims administrator's name, but right here in paragraph number 2, right here, it says, such and such insurance company has denied liability for the alleged back and shoulders based on several factual inconsistencies. The purpose of your evaluation is to determine whether the applicant sustained a specific injury arising out of and occurring during the course and scope of her employment with such and such employer. So we know that it involves a denied case. We know that causation is a disputed issue. We know that causation is a complexity factor right off the bat. Yahoo! Woo! We captured causation as a complexity factor just under the basis that it's a denied claim, and number 2, that we have a written request from the party or parties to address causation. So the request to address causation was just given to us in paragraph 1, and then later on down the page where it states nature and extent of the injury, it says, if you find that the applicant has sustained an industrial injury, we ask that you address which body parts were injured and provide an analysis of your conclusions. So we capture causation as a complexity factor. Okay? So then I saw the examinee, and the times involved with the evaluation included the following. Face-to-face time, 4.1 hours. Review of records, 3.05 hours. Medical research, 2.13 hours. Report preparation, 11.66 hours. So we have an ML104 here. We have 6 or more hours on any combination of 3 complexity factors. In fact, the total time with 3 or more complexity factors was 9.28 hours. So we have that captured. And then we also have causation has a complexity factor captured. So we have here a bona fide ML104. And the billing on this went out at $5,375 for a total of 21.51 hours. Of the 21.51 hours, 11.66 of that was report preparation time. Well, the reimbursement came in from the claims administrator for a bona fide ML104, but the claims administrator reduced the billing by the amount of time involved with report preparation, which was 11.66 hours. If you remember back with the Division of Workers' Compensation's interpretation of the complexity factors, the Division of Workers' Compensation was telling us that the only way or the only circumstance under which our time involved with report preparation would be reimbursed was under Pathway 3, which involved what they called a prior written agreement. The other two pathways under the ML104, the Division of Workers' Compensation was claiming, did not provide for reimbursement for the time involved with report preparation. Well, this ML104 was qualifying under Pathway 1, and so the claims administrator took the opportunity to reduce the bill by the amount of time involved with report preparation, which was 11.66 hours. They reduced the bill $3,062, and they paid $2,112. Well, this was for a date of service of 10/30/2017. 10/30/2017. And in reducing the billing by subtracting out the time involved with report preparation, the claims administrator stated in their explanation of review, right down here in this section, right here, they stated that the requirements were not met for billing report preparation time, as it is not reimbursable under Paths 1 and 2 to ML104 per CCR 9795C, the ML104 procedure description. Billing report preparation time on Paths 1 and 2 to ML104 is not consistent with the DWC training. And here they reference the education module. They say, see the DWC QME training program, evaluating California injured workers, qualified medical evaluators education course. So they reference the education module. Well, remember that the education module was published on 11/15/2017. This date of service was 10/30/2017, 2 weeks prior to the publication of the Division of Workers' Compensation's training module. But because we're allowed 30 days to get the report out, the report crossed the date and time wherein the DWC's education module was published. So by the time the claims administrator received the billing for the report, the DWC had already published their education module. Well, I wrote a letter that said, in my opinion, the Division of Workers' Compensation education module does not apply to dates of service prior to its publication. In other words, had I known that the Division of Workers' Compensation's education module was published or would be published, the evaluation certainly would have been much different. But because the education module was published after the evaluation, I proceeded with the evaluation under the interpretation of the complexity factors as they were at the time. Okay? So the issue involved the dates, the date of publication of the education module and the date of service of the evaluation, which was 2 weeks prior to the publication of the education module. Well, claims administrator was not moved by that. And they wrote back, this time, again, denying the additional reimbursement, and under the remarks section right here, they state, one sentence, they say that the Division of Workers' Compensation's education module for QMEs was declaratory of existing law. It did not change the law. So what they're saying is that even though the Division of Workers' Compensation's education module was published on 11/15, it was simply declaring the law as it existed at the time. It didn't change the law. The law was already ongoing to include the date of service of my evaluation of the examinee. And isn't it true that the other independent bill review cases that we just reviewed involve dates of service prior to the publication of the Division of Workers' Compensation's education module and involved reductions in fees based upon the DWC's interpretation, which is described by the claims administrator as being declaratory of existing law. It did not change the law. Well, I wrote back and I said, bullshit. That's a bunch of bullshit. That that it's improper to downcode and reduce payments on QME reports when we've had no training, no dissemination of any education at all. The only education at all that we received was the DWC's education module, which was published after all of these dates of service. So I submitted the matter to independent bill review, and guess what? Somehow, some way, and it's not clear in independent bill review's decision, it's not clear, but the independent bill review allowed for the time involved with report preparation, and they demanded that the claims administrator reimburse the deficient billing. So they agreed that we met all the complexity factors for face-to-face, review of records, that causation was a complexity factor because it involved a denied claim, and we had a written request from the parties. But right here, they stated that the medical legal fee schedule allows for report preparation under all ML 104 pathways, pathways 1, 2, and 3. Whereas in some of these other independent bill review documents, they tell us that report preparation only applies under pathway 3 of the ML 104 billing level. This one here tells us that report preparation only applies when the qualified medical evaluator has obtained a prior written agreement. But in this case, it involved my evaluation for some reason, either because of the dates of the publication of the Division of Workers' Compensation's education module, or perhaps because of the May 2018 QME settlement agreement, which abolished all the uncertainty related to the complexity factors. For whatever reason, it's not clear here, but independent bill review demanded that the claims administrator reimburse the report in full. So very, very interesting. I think the take-home message and the surprise that I have for you is that it seems that independent bill review is allowing for reimbursement for time involved with report preparation. So if you've had one of your reports downcoded and your report preparation time not reimbursed, I would suggest to you that you submit it to independent bill review. It's going to cost you $197, but I suggest you submit it and see what they say. The precedent has now been set for report preparation to be paid under all ML 104 pathways. So it's possible, and it's even very likely, that if you've had your report preparation time denied, it's possible that you could recover thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of report preparation time. In this particular case, the report preparation time amounted to a total of $3,062.50, and you can bet I'm going to have a big smile on my face when I get that check in the mail, along with reimbursement of the $197.50, which is the independent bill review application fee. So doctors, I hope this helps you. The take-home important points are that insurance carriers are looking to the Division of Workers' Compensation for instruction on how to reimburse our reports. And independent bill review is looking to the Division of Workers' Compensation as well as to their rules and criteria for reimbursing reports. So it's essential that you know the complexity factors just as well as the claims administrator knows them, and just as well as independent bill review knows them, so that you don't have to go through that nightmare of submitting your billing for analysis by a second and third party, and so that you can get your reports paid the first time through accurate and correct use of the complexity factors. And it's essential that you prove to the parties that every single one of your complexity factors comports with the exact letter of the law as it's described under CCR 9795, and therefore your report deserves and you expect to be paid 100% in full for each dollar amount that you've billed for each of the complexity factors. So I hope this helps you. It's been my pleasure to be with you on this entire series entitled Prove the Complexity Factors. Look forward to being with you on future series as well. And for now, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.